Hello, my friends, and welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about one of the most difficult, well, maybe not one of the most difficult, but certainly a most difficult situation where what happens when you try to have a difficult or hard conversation with your loved one, with your spouse, with your partner, and they either blow you off or they become defensive and attack you. How do we navigate that situation? That's what we're going to talk about today. Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome back. I hope that your day is going well, wherever you're at, whatever's going on today. I hope it's well. I hope that you are enjoying our full sprint into spring. What date does this come out? April 8th. So we should be, by the time you're listening to this, there should be some nice sunshine and we should have some good Michigan weather going on. I tell people all the time in the winter, I hear oh, why do you live in Michigan? Because very few states do spring, summer, and fall as well as Michigan does. All right, I want to talk to you about something today. In episode 335, we talked about the importance of hard conversations. In fact, that episode was called If Your Relationship Demands Peace, It's Not Healthy, It's Actually Poison. And there was a lot of response to that. A lot of people responded. A lot of people reached out to me, a lot of emails, a lot of questions. People talked to me when they saw me in person. And there's a couple themes, but the number one question was, what do I do when I try to have the hard conversation and my partner, my spouse, just kind of blows me off or they attack me, right? So typically there are two types of negative conversations or responses to the initiation of that hard conversation. And the first one is they attack. The second one is they avoid. An attack typically looks like somebody gets defensive. They flip the issue back on you, right? So you bring up something they did. Well, you do too. Or maybe they bring back something that you did. Well, the other day you did, and it has nothing to do with what you brought up, but still. They become the tone police. We've talked about this a lot. This is one of the number one things I see in couples therapy. The tone police go on the warpath. They'll bring up your past mistakes. And sometimes they'll even escalate the conflict until the original thing that you brought up absolutely 100% disappears. It's kind of wild to me when that happens, but it does happen. Avoidance will look a little bit different. They tend to shut down. They tend to just be, they change the subject. They say, not now. Can we talk about this later? I don't want to talk about this right now. Maybe they leave the room. They might promise to talk later, but never do. Sometimes they'll just be like, oh, you're absolutely right. I was wrong. That's it. I don't want to talk about it. Or they'll just say, you're right. And there's no actual agreement there. Attack and avoidance is different strategies, but it's aiming for the same goal, same result. And that is to make sure that the hard conversation, never actually happens. And that is a difficult place because then what happens? What do I do? And I've seen this with couples a lot. I see this, one of the couples that see me, they evidently listened to the podcast because they came in one week and they were like, hey, here's my question. This is what I need to talk about. What happens when we have the conversation and the other person kind of blows me off? What do I do then? And so one of the things then that you and I have to talk about as we navigate this conversation of, hey, what do I do, is we have to go a little bit after what is it that goes through our brain when our partner is the one that does it. When our spouse is the one who's like, what do we do? Because a lot of times we assume it's because they don't care. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes they just don't care. Often, though, it can be about something else. Because hard conversations threaten three things that people protect with a ferocity. I mean, they are adamant and ferocious about protecting these three things: their identity, their sense of safety, and their sense of control. So they defend themselves. Sometimes they defend themselves with aggression. Sometimes they defend themselves with distance. Neither one will actually solve the issue, but they do it to protect themselves from discomfort because hard conversations are not comfortable. And we do not like discomfort in our society. So they'll come at you, they'll blow up at you, or they'll walk away and try to hide from you because they're trying to protect themselves from the discomfort of having the hard conversation. That doesn't mean they don't care. Sometimes it happens faster than thought. It also doesn't make it okay. When I explain this to people, sometimes people are like, oh, so what? I'm just supposed to accept that? Nope. You can keep inviting them into the hard conversation if they're reacting poorly. And yet you can understand what's going on and still, invite to more. You can have higher boundaries. You can have higher expectations. You just kind of have to maybe explore, why is that happening? And then this brings us to our typical response when that happens, right? What do? We typically do one of two things. We either push harder, we go in harder, we elevate our intensity, we elevate our tone, we elevate our words, we elevate our volume, we get louder, more aggressive, or we give up and we walk away and we sit in silence. And we just pretend that it didn't happen. We silently resent, we silently seethe, but we hold it all inside and we ignore. And the problem is both strategies will often reinforce the pattern. So now we have two people that are both doing things that are hurting them from getting the very thing that they want to get. The attacker learns that intensity shuts the conversation down. The avoider learns that silence makes the issue disappear, and on the cycle continues. And a lot of times an intensifier, a person who uses intensity, will marry the avoider. And so it just kind of runs, and they have to choose something different, which is almost like a, well, no duh, Joe. But I can't tell you how rarely that actually happens. Which then brings us to an interesting question. What actually helps? What actually helps us to engage in the hard conversation? And what you have to do is you have to really pursue a healthy structure to the conversation. You have to pursue what I typically tell my clients is you have to pursue a healthy form to the conversation, which will bring about the function, or at least give you the best opportunity for the function. So a few practical things to consider. You're going to stay focused on the issue. If you've heard anything about my 6 rules of communication, you know that the 6th rule, the last rule, is today's news. It's one issue at a time. So we're just going to stay on one issue at a time. We're going to stay focused on that issue. And we're not going to chase every accusation or hyperbole or statement that gets thrown into the conversation. The second thing is we want to slow the conversation down. We want to make sure that we're trying to slow it down, maybe especially if they're attacking. We might say something like, hey, I want to talk about this. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm hoping to solve this problem together so that our relationship can benefit. I don't want to attack you. What I want to do is I want us to have a conversation that grows our relationship because I love you, right? We want to affirm to them that we love them. We want to refuse the shutdown without escalating. In other words, if somebody avoids, but they don't actually explode, they just avoid us, we need to come back to the conversation later. Hey, I don't want to fight, but this issue matters and we need to address it. I brought it up earlier and you kind of walked away from me. Could we talk about it now? And if not now, would you be willing to talk about it, and tell me what time you're willing to talk about it at some point here in the future? And here's the thing. Consistency wins. I say this to people all the time. Consistency wins. Consistency matters more than intensity. Consistency. That's how you win. And by winning, I can't guarantee you that you'll actually have the hard conversation, that your partner will actually engage in the hard conversation. But I can guarantee you that if you follow these 3 steps, staying focused on the one issue, slowing the conversation down, refusing the shutdown without bringing your own intensity, and you do that consistently, you give yourself the best chance to have the hard conversation. Perhaps the most difficult part of this is you can't make anybody have a conversation with you. You can't make anybody engage in the hard conversation. You can't make anybody care about the relationship more than they care about their own comfort. You can't make anybody regulate their behaviors. You can't make anyone dive into behaviors that are healthy. You can't make them try to be healthy. You can't make them anything. You can only invite them, and you have to do that consistently. So you want to do that as consistently as possible. Hey, can we talk about this? Hey, we need to talk about this. Because let's just say here's a normal interaction. You say to the person, hey, when you do this, I feel really hurt, or I don't feel connected to you. That's not true. That's dumb. right? That's an attack. And what do you want to do? Typically, right then, what do you want to do is you want to respond in kind. Or I just can't talk about this right now. And then if this is the 10th or 15th or 115th time, you roll your eyes and walk away. Or you roll your eyes and you go on the attack. And neither one helps. I had a couple that I was working with one time, and the wife said to me, she's like, I can't help myself sometimes. I just start saying things to him that are mean because I at least know if I can get a response out of him, at least it's something. And while I can understand her frustration and her pain, she was actively bringing harm to the relationship just like he was. And it wasn't helping her, nor was it helping the relationship. And I think this is where our conversation gets really difficult, because sometimes the real issue isn't communication skill. And I want to be clear here, a lot of times it is. A lot of times we give people more education on how to drive a car than we do on how to be married, on how to live in stressful relationships. And so a lot of times, a good couples counseling is about teaching people how to communicate, how to develop healthy relationship skills. And so sometimes, maybe a lot of times, that's what it is. They need to develop their communication, their relationship skills. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's willingness. You can't have a healthy relationship with someone who refuses to engage in reality. You cannot have a healthy relationship with someone who refuses to regulate their emotions and their behaviors. You're like, oh, wait, Joe, I caught it. You said regulate your emotions. And in the past, you've said you don't really feel like you can regulate your emotions. And that's true. I don't think you can regulate the emotions that you feel, but you can regulate whether or not you give into them. You can regulate whether or not you utilize those emotions and act out of them. And if you're in a relationship with someone who refuses to act out of their to not act out of their emotions all the time, it's going to be very difficult to have a healthy relationship. I've sat in the room with many couples where one or both of them are like, well, I just feel, I have this sense. Well, I mean, yeah, but do you have any evidence? Do you have any, like, what is going on with your life? What are you doing? Right? Well, you're just giving into your emotions. And if that's where you're at, if you're in a relationship with a person who won't engage in discomfort because their emotions outrun them, you can't make them. You can invite, you can ask, you can create space for conversation. You can ask yourself, am I a safe person to talk to? In other words, me, them, us. Is this a me problem, a them problem, an us problem, right? And you can do that. You can run through that truth. Is this something that I'm doing? Am I not a safe person to have hard conversations with? What would I need to do to be a safe person to have hard conversations with? You can even bring that up to them. Hey, I see you keep avoiding me, and I don't want you to. I want you to feel like we can talk. Could you tell me what it is I'm doing that you feel is unsafe? You're attacking me when I bring up hard conversations. Is there a way I could? Usually that's because the person doing the attacking feels attacked. You feel like something's threatened. Could you tell me how I could communicate to you so you don't feel threatened? And you can do all of these things, but you cannot force another adult to participate. And that's a really hard truth. And when people face this hard truth, it becomes very difficult. That their options become somewhat more limited. If someone repeatedly refuses healthy conversation, the relationship eventually hits a ceiling. You can't build depth with someone who won't enter difficult spaces. You can't grow healthy with someone who won't go in and pull the weeds. You can't do difficult with someone who will only make it more difficult. And I realize what I'm saying here, because a lot of times people come in and they're like, well, then what do we do? We've been together 10 years. Okay, part of it, I'm just going to upset people here. Part of it is we have too many people playing married. Marriage is just a piece of paper. Okay, maybe, but here's the thing. Then keep your life separate. Keep your lives separate until you're sure that the person can have hard conversations. Because what happens is when the person can't have a hard conversation, and you can never have a hard conversation, I realize that's a universal. What happens is the relationship eventually stagnates when someone refuses to participate in the hard of relationship conversations of relationship. And when the relationship stagnates, it gets sick and it dies. And you just can't do that. And part of the problem is I sit with people is they rush into a relationship, they rush into things that bring them together. They have kids together, they buy a house together, they live together, all of these things, and they're not ready because they haven't developed the skills of having hard conversations. Because remember, hard conversations, the goal of hard conversations is not about winning. It's not about me one-upping you or you one-upping me. It's about growing our relationship, understanding, accountability, problem solving, healthiness. It's about those things. Because when those things are present, emotional security becomes present. When emotional security becomes present, what happens? The relationship grows. And a relationship where those things can't happen eventually becomes one of two things. It eventually becomes either explosive, and we've all known people in these relationships, or it becomes emotionally distant. And emotionally distant usually ends up explosive anyhow. For a long time, I debated as I was putting these show notes together. I debated saying it always ends up explosive. But I already had in the show notes two other universals. I only used one of them, but still I had it in there. And so I didn't think, I thought 3 was too many for one show that I figure is going to be around 25 minutes. So, and I tend to hammer universals. But here's the thing, nobody wants an explosive or emotionally distant relationship. There's my third one, nobody. Nobody wants explosives or emotionally distant relationships. What people want is healthy, growing relationships. Right? I hear relationships. I had a client one time tell me, the husband was he was upset. He wanted to go fishing. And so the wife had to go to work and he didn't think she should be able to go to work. And he was just like, well, I'm effing going. Bro, what are you doing? You can't do that. And here's the thing. Healthy relationships are built by people who are willing to step into the uncomfortable conversations and stay there long enough to work through them, right? If you've ever been to any of my conferences, if you've ever been to any of my sessions, I tell people one of the things that healthy couples do is they figure out how to enter into the circle of conflict, stay there long enough to solve the problem, and then exit without leaving scars. And that happens when people are willing to engage in hard conversations. That doesn't mean that we don't create space for them to be uncomfortable at first, for them to be slow, for them to grow slowly. Change and growth happen slowly. That's something we have to accept. And if peace requires silence, it isn't peace, right? It's poison. But if a hard conversation always, or I would even say regularly, in fact, I would probably lead with regularly, if hard conversations regularly turn into attacks or avoidance, that's a sign too. That is a sign about the health of your relationship. It is an indicator. Now, it's not the only indicator. I went and had a physical here just a few days ago, like my yearly physical. I'm getting my knee replaced, and so I had to have, by the time this drops, I should have a new knee. But before recording here, I went and got my knee, or I'm going to get my knee replaced, and you got to go and, so you get on my chart and I look at my response or my testing, and I have elevated white blood cells. So I look up, well, what does that mean? Turns out it doesn't mean anything in and of itself. At least the elevated number that mine were at doesn't mean anything. It could be for a variety of reasons. And this could be that, right? It could be just, okay, people are growing. And I see this a lot of times, very unhealthy people get together. And then as one of them gets healthy, people don't tend to get healthy at the same pace. In fact, that would be a great episode all by itself. People don't tend to get healthy at the same pace. Typically, one person gets healthy at a different pace than the other person. And so one of the things that you have to do is you have to look at this and ask yourself, are we getting better at hard conversations? Are we moving in the right direction? Maybe we have not been doing good at hard conversations, but are we getting better? If we have 1 out of 4 good conversations, but for the last 2 years we had 0 out of 4, then we're moving in the right direction. We're still not near where we want to be, but we're moving, right? Because something in the relationship needs to change. If there is regular attacks or avoidance, something in the relationship needs to change. The first step to change, of course, is recognizing the pattern. And then once we see the pattern, we can decide what we're going to do about it. This does beg a question. What do we do when there's no growth? And that's where this gets much more complicated That's where this gets much more difficult. I think that's where you then start to pursue professional help. You start to pursue one-on-one talk therapy, couples talk therapy, and then you'll have to make hard decisions. I can't really tell you what to do on a podcast because that just wouldn't. I have no idea. But you'll have to decide. We're always coming back to these questions. What do you want? What are you willing to pay? What are you willing to risk? And so if there's no growth, you need to really make sure that you're working on your side of it first. Am I a safe person to talk to? Am I approaching this? Now, here's the thing. I get nervous when I say that because I've sat in a room with a lot of people who they excuse, like they often will say to me, I need to figure out how to say to my partner, my spouse, what I'm saying in a better way. And what they mean by a better way is that I need my partner, my spouse to not explode. I need to figure out what to say so they don't explode. I have bad news. They're always responsible for their exploding. And at some point, you have to decide, what does it mean for you to hold them responsible for their own behaviors? And that's a very difficult situation. If you're in that situation, I don't say this lightly. I feel for you. I really do. And you'll have to figure that out as you move forward in your relationship and your own growth. Let's do something I don't think I've ever done before on the show. I'm going to end with a couple of questions about this topic. If you're honest with yourself, when hard conversations come up in your relationship, do you tend to attack, avoid, or engage? And what does it look like for you to choose engagement? That's question one. Question two, is there a conversation you've been avoiding in your relationship because you're afraid of how the other person will react? Question three, when your partner brings up something difficult, are you trying to understand the issue or trying to protect yourself from discomfort? Man, that one. Whew. What would you change in your relationship? What would change in your relationship if both of you decided that hard conversations were a signal of health instead of a threat? That'd be a really good conversation to have with your spouse. Think about the last difficult conversation you tried to have. What was the pattern? Was it attack, avoidance, engagement? What was it? Hard conversations take two people. Healthier conversations require participation from both. You can invite the person, you can open the door, you can try to stay calm and be honest. In fact, you can actually do better than try. You can stay calm and be honest. But if your spouse attacks you every time you try to talk, or they shut the conversation down completely, there isn't a communication trick that magically fixes that. I can't solve that for you in a podcast. But what I can tell you unequivocally is that you get to choose how you show up. And what you can do is show up differently. You can be clear with them. I mean, like crystal clear, like, hey, when we talk boundaries and communication, this is how I will engage you. You can't yell at me. You can't just walk away. You can be calm. You can be consistent. Consistency wins. And you can pay attention to what the other person chooses to do with that. And then you have to make your decisions based on what they choose to do. I hope this helps. I hope that this is something that answers some of those questions. If it doesn't, reach out to me. Let me know. And let's do a third episode on this because this topic is clearly important. It clearly resonated with people and it clearly brought some level to people of like, hey, okay, well, what does this mean? How do I go about this? So let's kick that off and let's see what happens. All right. Hey, listen, do me a favor, share this with your friends. And if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe. We'll get something out to you every week, I hope. All right, thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.